Well, hello, good people of the internet, and welcome back to another episode of Wray's Garage. Today, we're going to be discussing and reviewing the idea of what do I do if I'm cross-shopping an Aston Martin and a 911, and specifically in this case, because of the vintage, a 997.1 or 2, and an Aston Martin V8 Vantage in the 2006-2009 era, as that's where there's been some convergence in pricing. Although I'm sure you could argue that the 911s may just have held up value a little better, specifically if you're talking about automatics. Or manual automatics, or sport shift in Aston Martin parlance. So one of the categories that, whether you're a car lover or not, you will probably take a look at first, that's the superficial nature of the vehicles. So beauty in the eye of the beholder, certainly a very subjective parameter at the best of times. But for me, the Aston, whenever I look at it, look back at it, leave the garage, I have to do a double take. That's how I feel about the Aston. So the 911, definitely an iconic shape. But as far as beautiful and elegant, I think there's more function than form in the 911. Again, one man's opinion, not trying to make any friends here, or otherwise. So that's obviously the parameter. I think everybody subjectively looks at the car and they see what they see. Now, there is also the question of V8 versus flat 6 and which sound you prefer. The V8 has very much, to me, at least my ears, that American muscle vibe. And the flat 6, yeah, in the Caymans, Boxsters, 911s alike, the naturally aspirated flavors, yeah, for me, that's a win for Porsche. Although I do like the aggressive nature of the V8, especially in this particular one with the updated and upgraded exhaust and tune, it can be a little obnoxious at times. When I think about the interiors of the cars and the place to sit, well, first I'll start with a knock. Can you see the Magoo going on up here? Yeah, so I'm no legs and all torso. So I think if I were proportioned differently, like if my legs matched my torso, I'd be 6'3". I'm 5'11", but all of it is waist up. And so I do struggle to sit correctly in this car, and I don't remember having that issue in the 911. But throwing that aside, because obviously that is a very personal situation, the interiors, I would nod towards the Aston Martin. The dial setup is very classy and classic. In a lot of ways. The Porsche very much more sport-defined, center tack, and driven around the idea of racing and its racing heritage. And I think that's where you start to see where these two cars diverge in terms of their audience. So yes, the price is the same. Their categories similar. I mean, obviously Porsche, more of that racing heritage, and Aston Martin, frankly, does have the racing heritage. But in the Vantage here, which is the most sporty coupe, shorter wheelbase, it still does not handle anything like the 911. It feels like a great date night car, a great car to pull up to a valet, whereas the Porsche will get you from A to B, and then awesome handling around the track. And I would say when it comes to the handling, or when it comes to primary task to talent, and again, at the risk of alienating people here, the Aston is an excellent around town, an excellent cruiser, almost GT-like, even in the Vantage flavor. I know the bigger V12s and so on are that way too. The 911 gets to the track and would probably obliterate this. This just is a little bit unwieldy in my eyes. Now, I've never tracked it, so that's more speculative on my part, so you could definitely discount that. If you are an Aston Martin V8 Vantage 2007 vintage racer, please comment below and tell me what I'm missing here, because maybe it's got some autocross or a light DE day in its future to really vet that more thoroughly. So another key differentiator in my eyes is there are many, many 911s on the road. Not a bad thing, because there's a really good reason for that. They're extremely awesome to drive. But the Aston's just got that little bit of luxury, a little bit of cachet. James Bond is going to drive it. It's good enough for me, is my attitude there. But I do like that difference. And I think that, again, maybe doesn't matter to a lot of people. And when it comes down to brass tacks, if I'm buying an Aston Martin, I don't think it's track focused or even track regular. Whereas the 911, definitely that door is wide open to you at any and all times, even though it can do everything else on the street that the Aston can. So in the task to talent category, again, there's another divergence there. So while people do cross-shop this, or maybe by people I just mean me, there are some fairly glaring differences that will bear out over time. And if there's really dumb advice here from D-Ray, test drive it. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you how many cars that I've thought I wanted, driven them, and then bounced into a, oh my gosh, I am so glad I didn't foolishly, blindly buy a car. And again, I know it probably seems like nobody does that, right? Well, I don't know. I think it is easy when you get into a dealership or in a car lot to get a little bit taken away and a little bit tunnel vision. If you're not disciplined, of course, and I know many of us are. So that is an aspect of buying a car that I would definitely say take the test drive more seriously. From a salesperson standpoint, they want to get you in, get you out, prove that the wheels are turning, and that's about it. But if you take control of the test drive, I think that's where, understanding what you want from a car, minus the track part, get out there and stress test it, put it out there. So one of the things that I'd be interested to put side by side is the fuel efficiency. I know that fuel efficiencies are always posted with new cars, but what's the real world efficiency? And I assume Dennis and I both have a similar spirited sense of driving. So I can see down here he's getting 17.5 miles per gallon on average. So I'll check that out in the Aston when I get it back. And then the other thing that I notice is when you put them side by side, when you think about what's a more kind of a scalpel versus a hammer. And I felt similarly when I had my very brief experience and stint with a C6 Corvette, where the power's there. It's how it's deployed and how it feels. So this 911 here in the 997.2 generation feels smaller, even though I think side by side they're essentially the same size, but the feeling when you're driving it and when you're maneuvering it, the 911 is very much more responsive. And again, getting back to that, and I don't want to use this word, it's not the right word, I call it casual. It's just a more comfortable ride in the Aston as far as it doesn't have that urgency about it. It doesn't have that sense of, I want to beat you. It's just, hey, we're going to get there and we're going to get there with style. And the 911 says, let's get there fast and let's whip in and out of cars, let's move in and out of traffic. And so there's definitely a difference there. Steering, a little bit more immediate, even on these smaller tires here in the 911. From the cockpit here, staring out over the front end of the Porsche, all I really see is the left-hand side fender. And probably I can see a little bit of the right-hand side, but I'm blocked by the camera here. Whereas in the Aston, you definitely see the full hood or bonnet for those on the other side of the pond. And so in front of you, there's a different presence, but it does dip off in the Aston, and it has a particularly long nose. So you do have to, initially you feel a little bit unaware, spatially aware, spatially unaware, I don't know, whatever that is. So it takes a minute to trust the size of the vehicle, and that mostly comes into play when parking more than any other aspect. I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't mention the back seats in a 911. Obviously in a Vantage, there are no back seats. There's a nice shelf there, which is excellent from a storage perspective, but you can't sit anyone back there. And you know, I don't think people sitting back behind me in this would be particularly comfortable, but in theory you can get two butts in seats. And if you have particularly short legs, I think that would be advantageous to your comfort and ride. But from a functional standpoint, that 911 technically has a 2+2 format, whereas the Vantage is strictly a two-seater coupe. Now what's interesting about the 2+2 versus the two-seat format is in the cockpit here of the 911, we're dealing with what feels like a more compact area, whereas in the Aston Martin, I would compare it more to a cozy theater chair, maybe. That might be a stretch. But definitely, the space that isn't used for tiny seats in the rear seems to be better allocated to giving you more of a sense of space and luxury for you and a passenger. So there's definitely again, I think that's part of the tight nature of the cabin and the more nimble nature of the 911. And I know the 911s have increasingly over the years and future generations become more of a GT feeling car, in spite of the fact that their GT series of cars are far more track oriented. It's a stiffer ride here in the 911. Very much the Aston does eat up a lot of any imperfections in the road, and the Porsche is giving more feedback from the tires, especially in the steering, but also through the suspension. For completeness, I wanted to talk a little bit about braking. So I don't find the brakes in either car to be terribly keen, but I will tell you that when you're braking in the Aston, you feel the weight. And when I'm braking in the 911 here, it's not that I feel the weight necessarily, although I do know the weight is pushing me from behind there with that motor behind me. It just doesn't feel like it's clamping down. And again, some of that's probably weight driven. Some of it is probably potentially just pad and rotor setup. But between the cars, at least in what I would consider stock formats, I would say the braking is, the feel is relatively the same. There's definitely you get to put some push down before you get bite. There's no immediacy in either particular car. Again, a setup could definitely make an adjustment there, probably on both fronts. So if you hadn't drawn your own conclusions about what was right for you, what might be right for you if you are cross-shopping these two cars, or additional considerations if these cars are in the mix of other sports-type cars you're looking at, I think what you're seeing in the Aston Martin is a luxury, cachet-branded, capable car that has comfort and luxury assigned to it. Whereas we look at the Porsche 911, more purpose-built, scalpel-like, a bit more of an urgency about the drive, and a more of a tight feeling setup, and more focused on what it can do on the track while quite capable around town. Whereas the Aston Martin, probably very capable around town, and track performance is there, but I think you'll see more 911s at the track than you'll ever see Aston Martins. Again, not that they're not capable, I just think task to talent, and I would say, that if you're going to do the 80-20 use, or use the 80-20 phraseology, I'd say 80% of the Porsche is designed to get on the track, and 80% of the Vantage is designed to give you a really cool-looking sports car ride, but not necessarily built to take you out of an apex at high speed. Hope that helped you out. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts of your own, please post those down below. Please do like, subscribe, and share to your heart's content. Subscriptions are absolutely free, now and for the foreseeable. And clicking that like button means that you're demonstrating that the time spent on this video was worth it to you, gave you some good insights, and could potentially expose this video to more like-minded people. So that being said, thanks very much for checking in. Be memorable, be well, and I hope to see you on a video soon. Bye now.